Let's talk now, though, about road traffic and criminal defence, because we saw earlier in the day in the show this guy, this numpty, complete, absolute and utter idiot, who overtook an ambulance and then slowed down to stop it from being able to make its way at high speed to wherever it was supposed to be going. Let's talk now, though, to Nick Freeman, also known, of course, as Mr. Loophole. National highways have been big in the news this week, as have the police, as have Just Stop Oil protesters, as have all of the incidents that have happened. They've done it again today, the fourth day in a row. They've managed to get people up gantries. The police are trying to make arrests, but they're also arresting journalists. Let's find out from Nick what's going on. Hi, Nick. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Let's start off with Just Stop Oil. I mean, surely to heavens, we must be able to find some kind of legal mechanism to prevent this from happening whenever they feel like doing it, because it feels like they do whatever they want and nobody seems to be able to stop them.
Well, there is now new legislation in place, brand new legislation, which on maximum sentence carries out 10 years in prison. What needs to happen, the legislation is now in place. The police clearly need to arrest the right people, to arrest journalists. I mean, it's just horrendous. One wonders what they're doing.
Yes.
But we need to expedite these. We need to fast track the people, these protesters, so that they appear within court within 24 hours. Presumably the cases are so serious, these sort of hold-ups on the motorway should go immediately to the Crown Court because of the devastating effect it's having on people's lives and the economy. They should appear in the Crown Court for plea within 24 hours. And if they want to plead not guilty, that trial should be held within 4 weeks, and then justice is administered. And I think if the judges use the power that is available to them, assuming, of course, these people are convicted, and one has to remember there's always a presumption of innocence, but if these people are ultimately convicted and serious sentences which now exist are handed out, I think it will cause many of these would-be protesters to think very carefully about what they're doing. I mean, these protests are causing a much greater adverse impact to the environment, which is meant to be their cause. They're never going to succeed, and they really need to go about it in a very different, more constructive way.
Yes.
These are criminal acts with serious consequences, but the police need to get a grip, and by arresting the media, as they have done, that's obviously now going to cost the taxpayer money.
Yes.
Because those two journalists who were arrested will have actions for wrongful arrest and false imprisonment, which I think are probably indefendable. It's not my area.
I mean, sadly, I want them to be getting compensation for it, because it was a ridiculous thing, particularly the guy we spoke to, Tom Bowles, whose house was then searched while his wife and daughter were in it, and he was in custody at 11 o'clock at night. Absolutely unbelievable. But the trouble is, it's, as you say, it's our money that they're going to be giving out. Yeah.
Absolutely. He was incarcerated for about 14 hours, 16 hours, huge invasion on his privacy, his rights, his right to freedom. It beggars belief how they can be so incompetent. I don't understand.
No.
It doesn't instill us with...
No, it really doesn't. And as I say...
So that at least...
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, Mike. The power is there. The power is there. But the way around it is to fast track, have special courts, let's deal with them, get them up quickly, and let's administer justice and see what sort of effect that will have.
Absolutely right. Now, the other question that people are asking me is, do the police and or the highways agency have to actually shut down the road? Because if somebody's clambered up on one of these stanchions, one of these gantries, what is the position legally? Why do they have to actually stop the traffic?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because national highways actually do not owe a duty of care to the motorist. So in terms of smart motorways, we've heard the fiasco that has unravelled in terms of the terrible accidents, the fatalities, and in recent rulings, they've been held not to owe a duty of care. So if somebody wants to climb up a gantry and they fall, and obviously no one wishes them to fall, however strongly one feels about it, we don't want people to die as a consequence of this. But if they fall, the police obviously have to close the motorway while they're there. If they fall onto the road, then obviously that is their own problem. As long as no one pushes them or does anything to cause them to fall. The police are faced with a very difficult position, and I think if they allowed the motorway to continue running, they would face a barrage of criticism, and in the event that someone did fall, they would, of course, have a huge civil action against them, which again, Mike, is you and I paying for it. So sadly, whether they need to, I suppose the problem is these gantries go right across the motorway, and if they close one lane or another lane, these protesters would move to the lane that's open. So it's an impossible position. The only answer is to administer justice quickly, and I think the police have to do what they're doing, which is close the motorways.
No, right. I mean, one of our viewers actually came up with a great idea yesterday. Just paint these stanchions and these balustrades, or whatever you want to call them, with that no-climb paint, anti-climb paint, and you can't actually then climb up them without getting stuck to them and/or getting covered in some black, horrible stuff.
Well, you know, we're talking about people who love to spray orange paint all over the place, so whether that would actually be an effective deterrent. And the other thing, of course, is think of the cost implication involving that. You know, you'd have to close the motorways for that work to actually be undertaken. So it's a good idea. There are lots of ideas. Most of them I don't think one could broadcast.
No, indeed. Tell us a bit about the national highways in general, because you've got a beef with them. Tell us what it is.
Well, my beef is that we had a new piece of legislation, one in 2007, called the Corporate Manslaughter Act, which was designed to make people more responsible for corporate management. So when we have when a management ultimately is negligent, and that negligence tragically leads to death, they are held criminally liable. That was the purpose of the legislation, so that they would, in fact, take a much greater care to the people they owe a duty of care to. And what we have is this bizarre situation where we've had two coroners recently who have suggested that there is a case for corporate manslaughter against what's now called National Highways. It used to be Highways England. It's now called National Highways. But the law actually is, this is the CPS view, and I suspect they're right, is they actually do not owe a relevant duty of care. So, for example, when these smart motorways were designed, they were supposed to have a lay-by every 500 metres. In reality, it's every 2.5 kilometres. They're supposed to have equipment that brings the lane to a halt within 16 seconds, so that they are aware, their cameras are aware, that there is a stranded vehicle. We know that there's a staff shortage, that the technology doesn't work, and even when it's working at its highest level, it probably would take a minute at least for people to be aware we can't go on that lane, because it's 16 seconds for the people to respond in the station and the central office, and then for drivers to react. So you're talking about a minute. And then, of course, you've got adverse weather conditions when the cameras don't pick up stranded vehicles. There's a whole host of problems that go wrong that are causing fatalities. And they clearly do owe a duty of care, because it's within their remit, it's their responsibility. But the law allows them this lacuna, this loophole, which does stick in my throat when I say it, and it allows them to escape criminal culpability. So they are legally not liable. And the way around this, I always think that if you make people responsible, they behave in a very different way. If you make them accountable, they think, we need to get this working. The bosses who are paid massive money will need to say, we need to get our staff, and we need to put things in place, contingencies in place to make these roads safe. And at the moment, when you're a stranded vehicle, they're not safe. They're not disincentivized, the bosses, because they're not going to be held criminally liable. And I think that's a huge mistake, and it needs to be rectified. Because, of course, what happens then is, if they were criminally liable, there's an unlimited fine, but more significantly, the court can order what's called a remedial action, which means it can instruct, for example, this to happen, for them to be a permanent hard shoulder at all times, for them to do this with the technology. There can be all sorts of things that the court can order, and they have to comply. At the end of the day, of course, it's the taxpayer who's paying the bill for the unlimited fine. This is the problem. These are government bodies, but a government can be sued.
Yes. A
government can be criminal liable, it can be sued civilly as well. So this is a government body. They need to take account. They need to be accountable, and I think once they are, this will help the problem. OK.
Nick, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Nick Freeman there, road traffic and criminal defence lawyer, also known as Mr Loophole, saying that the National Highways Agency, National Highways, needs to be more responsible and needs to be more culpable and needs to be more held